Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. This time we'll be making an insane boat that does some crazy stuff with projectiles and a lot of maths. Before we get into it, as usual, the GitHub with all the code and assets can be found in the description. So first things first, open your .cs project file within tmodloader. The first thing you're going to need to make for your new mod is the bow. Now to do this, make a new item in your items folder. You can name it whatever you want. I've gone with Hunter's Bow of Magic. Make sure you add .cs. Now you're going to need to import the usual Terraria, Terraria.id, Terraria.modloader, Microsoft.xna.framework, and you might also need your Terraria mod.projectiles. So first of all, define your namespace, set up your class as a mod item. For set static defaults, it's the same as the sword. Now pay attention to the set defaults because this is much different from the sword. First of all, make sure you set it to damage class.ranged. Set the width and height of your item to the size of the sprite you made. I actually scaled mine up by 2 to make it really big. Now, here is the shoot function, which, as you can guess, makes it shoot. Make sure you do the mod content.projectile type Hunter's Arrow of Magic, which we'll make later. Finally, set the use style to shoot and the use animations. Make sure you specify that no melee is true so that you can't accidentally kill things while holding it. Finally, shoot speed just means the velocity at which your bow shoots the arrows, which won't matter anyway since our arrows are magical. Next, you'll just need to make a use item bool because I thought that it would be kind of cool to add some knockback. So basically what this does, I'll get into the trigonometry maths a bit later, but it basically calculates what angle your mouse cursor is away from the player and gets the inverse of that, pushes you in the other direction. So that's all you need for a bow actually. And you can modify the shoot function. I just decided not to. So next we move on to the Hunter's Arrow of Magic. So this is the main arrow, and as you can see it has a lot of code. So first up you have to do the same thing as everything else. This time however you make mod projectile. So we'll need a boolean called hit cursor is false. So what this does is it allows the arrow to follow your cursor until it hits your cursor, in which case it stops following your cursor, otherwise it would just get stuck there. For the set static defaults, you do not need a tooltip, as you can see here. In defaults, you need damage, width, height, AI style, friendly, hostile, damage type, penetrate, time left, alpha, light, ignore water, tile collide, scale, AI type, alpha, and penetrate. And what these do, damage and width, height, are self-explanatory. AI style basically copies the vanilla AI, of which we modify a lot, but it makes it have gravity, etc. So friendly means that it can't, that it can damage enemies. So when that's true, it can damage enemies. When it's false, that means the arrow will not help you. It's not friendly. Hostile means whether the arrow can damage you or friendly NPCs, which obviously you want to be false, since when it spawns a projectile, it would straight up kill you. Next up, the damage type is just if you have a melee or mage projectile, you put those classes in. We're still ranged, so we'll set it to ranged. Penetrate is how many enemies it can go through. So I changed it to 10 later, because, well, it's just kind of useful to be able to go through enemies in case you spawn inside of one. Next up, time left is the lifespan of the projectile. So it works based on a frame, so 60 frames is 1 second because Terraria runs at 60 FPS. That means that the projectile has 10 seconds before it disappears to prevent lag should you shoot it off into the distance. Alpha is the transparency at which the projectile spawns in with. 255 means it's fully transparent, which provides a much nicer visual because it looks like it's coming out of the bow. Light emits light like a torch. 1F is a decent amount. But I kind of wanted to be able to see at night when you shoot your arrow, since it does follow your cursor, so you need to look where it's going. Ignore water and trial collide are self-explanatory, and AI type is just an integer, so you just set it to a particular projectile. Now, in the onHit NPC, I've made it so that it spawns a spread of arrows around the NPC with a custom arrow type that will come back, turn around, and hit the NPC again. So it's pretty cool. So how this works is, upon hitting NPC, you want to kill the projectile, of course, so that doesn't go through multiple NPCs. I did add a buff on fire for 60 seconds just to show you how it's done. But now we define a vector 2 called the base position. So this is the center of the target that we hit, and that is where all of our projectiles will be spawned. So just set the x and y of base position to the target.center.x and target.center.y. So we can do this based off projectile count. So you can set that to whatever you want. I went with 8 since it's not too many, it's not too little. So now you're going to do for basically it'll repeat projectile count amount of times. And so this is a bit complicated here. So it spawns a projectile source null at the base position. However, it starts off with a velocity going straight to the left, but it rotates it by 180 degrees divided by your projectile count. So that means it'll spread out your 8 projectiles evenly across 180 degrees. So obviously times I. So the first one will be at 0 degrees, and then 20 or so, and then so on. So that creates a nice even semicircle. Next up, it sets the projectile type to the Hunter's Arrow of Magic Reversing, which is the special arrow type I mentioned earlier that we're going to be making that will reverse the projectile once it's in the air. Next up, we have the when we spawn, we want this arrow to do one of two things. It's either going to destroy the projectile and spawn a couple new projectiles, which we'll also make in a bit, right at the top of the world, kind of like the Star Fury. And then they will shoot down towards where the mouse cursor was, and with a bit of spread. Or alternatively, we want to just keep going on with this projectile, which is defined in the AI function. So back to the trigonometry thing earlier. So basically, arctan works by you specify the opposite over the adjacent side of a right angled triangle, which you can form if you imagine if you have the mouse cursor up here and you're down here, you can form a right angled triangle by going along the bottom and then up. Now with that, you can figure out the angle between the up or down angle based on which side it's on, and that will tell you, and you can rotate that by the amount. You can rotate the velocity of the projectile by that much to make it always autocorrect itself to aim towards the mouse cursor. So it's trigonometry. And then we find out the actual distance between the cursor and the projectile center by using Pythagoras' theorem to find the hypotenuse of the same right angle triangle. And if the distance is smaller than 5 blocks, then it says that it's hit the cursor, and that means that this no longer applies to it. And that will mean that it will just keep going in the direction it was going. So that's all for this particular projectile. Now we can go on to the Hunter's Arrow, which is the one that is occasionally spawned at the top of the world. So you can just copy and paste that. And here's where on spawn, so it'll do the same trigonometry thing, except this won't update it every frame, so it'll just be a one-time aiming thing, so it's pretty simple. And then the Arrow of Magic Reversing, it's the same defaults, as the normal arrow of magic, except the only difference is that it saves its like original spawning velocity upon spawning, which is useful because we can then slowly decrease the velocity by a set amount of the original velocity. So if the set amount was 60, then it would lose 4 velocity each frame and eventually turn around and accelerate back at the target. So that is all for the code. For my sprites, that's my bow, that's my arrow, and they're all the same arrow because you don't actually tell the difference between the projectiles in game. Once you are done with your code and spriting, make sure you head to Develop Mods, build and reload your mod, and make sure it's activated in Mod Browser. Then join into your world. I recommend making Journey World so you can play around with the time. I've set up a bunch of target dummies here so that I can demonstrate. First, check that your item actually exists by using a cheat sheet. Then spawn it in, because if you're like me, I didn't even bother adding a recipe for it. When you shoot, it should either rain a plethora of projectiles from the sky, like that, or shoot a singular aiming projectile, like this one. As you can see, if I hit the target dummy, it creates a nice little semicircle spread of projectiles, and you can fire it pretty rapidly, doing a fair bit of damage. And as you can see, it would destroy these target dummies if they weren't invincible. You can play around with this any way you want. I'm testing it on the Eye of Cthulhu boss, so it's a bit overpowered. As you can see, if I use my self-aiming projectile, pop my mouse cursor, boom, he's dead. So that's all fun. Make sure you drop a subscribe, I'd appreciate it, and comment what you want me to do next down below.